My name is Clara Whitmore. I'm 28 years old. I grew up in a quiet town just outside of Portland, Maine, in a modest two-story house that held more secrets than I realized. And the biggest one? It lived behind the heavy oak door at the end of the upstairs hallway, Grandma Eleanor's room. As a child, I used to pause at that door almost every time I walked past. I'd tilt my head, press my ear gently against the wood, and listen. But there was never a sound. No creaking floorboards. No music. No hum of conversation. Just silence, thick and unsettling. "Don't ever go in there, Clara," my mother, Patricia, warned me when I was about 7. Her voice wasn't harsh, but it was firm. Not the usual because I said so tone. It felt deeper than that, like there was pain behind the warning. "But why, Mum?" I remember asking once, tugging gently on her sweater. She didn't answer. Instead, she knelt, brushed a strand of hair from my cheek, and simply said, "It's not a place for you. Please trust me." So I did. For years. Growing up, Grandma was peculiar. Not cruel, not unkind, but distant. She rarely spoke unless spoken to. She attended birthday parties and Christmas dinners, but always left early and avoided photos. I never saw her outside that house. Never saw her drive. And she didn't have friends over. No phone calls. No letters. Still, I loved her in that quiet, awkward way children love their elders. I brought her tea on Sundays. She'd pat my hand softly, but never look me in the eye. Sometimes, when I turned away, I felt her stare linger on me, not in a bad way, but like she was studying something too delicate to touch. One winter evening when I was 12, the power went out. The whole house was cast in silence, save for the howling wind outside. I tiptoed upstairs with a flashlight, the beam dancing across the walls. My room was freezing, and I remembered extra blankets were usually stored in the hallway closet, just beside Grandma's door. As I reached for the closet handle, I heard something. A faint shuffle. My heart skipped. I turned toward the door. The doorknob, old brass and worn, moved, just slightly. Then it stopped. I stood frozen for what felt like an hour. Then I turned, took the blanket, and ran back to my room. I didn't tell Mum. Not because I didn't want to, but because some part of me believed she already knew. Over the years, that room became almost symbolic. It was the heart of a secret we were all orbiting. Even as an adult, when I moved out and got my own apartment in Boston, the thought of that door stayed with me like an itch I couldn't scratch. I asked Mum about it once more when I was 22. We were having tea, sitting by the fireplace on a snowy evening. "I still think about Grandma's room," I said softly. Mum's spoon paused mid-stir. She didn't look up. "You said not to go in there, but I'm grown now. What's in there, really?" She finally looked up, her eyes tired. "Some things are better left closed, Clara. But you've been in there, right?" "No," she said. I laughed nervously. "You mean never?" She nodded. I gave her privacy. Same as I'm asking you to give me peace about it. That was the last time I brought it up. Until her funeral. It happened quietly. Grandma Eleanor passed in her sleep at 87. It was a cold spring morning when I got the call. I drove back home immediately. The house felt smaller, emptier without her silent presence. The funeral was simple, just close family, a few neighbors. Mr. Blackwood, our neighbor since forever, gave a small eulogy about Eleanor's love for birds and knitting. No one mentioned the room. But the moment the guests left, I climbed the stairs. I stood in front of that old door, the same one that haunted my childhood. I half expected it to resist me, to whisper warnings or shift its knob again like it did that night. Instead, I found something else. My mother, standing silently behind me. She held something out. A key. "It's yours now," she said quietly. "She left it for you." And just like that, everything began to unravel. Underscore, 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 underscore 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 underscore. The key felt heavier than it looked. A dull bronze, slightly tarnished, with a curved handle that looked hand-forged. I turned it over in my palm, feeling the cold bite of the metal. My mother didn't say another word. She just placed it in my hand and walked away, down the stairs into the kitchen and out of sight. No instructions, no explanations. I stared at the door again. I had dreamt about this moment 100 times. Some dreams had me opening the door and stepping into a void. Others revealed a second version of our house inside, darker, twisted, with whispers behind every wall. Once I opened the door and saw myself as a child crying on the floor, reaching for someone I couldn't see. Now here I was, 28, and very much awake. I inserted the key. It turned. The lock clicked, sharper than I expected, like a sound frozen in time that had been waiting to escape. I hesitated, half expecting my mother to come rushing up the stairs to stop me. But the house was silent. I opened the door slowly. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not musty like I expected, not decayed, but a strange mix of lavender and something faintly metallic like old coins. The room was dim. The curtains had been drawn tight, yet the faintest sliver of afternoon light cut through, casting long shadows across the floor. It wasn't messy. No clutter. No hoarding. Everything was in its place. The bed was neatly made. A thick floral comforter tucked perfectly. A rocking chair sat beside a small table, where a worn, leather-bound book rested beside a pair of antique glasses. There was a sense of reverence in the room, like walking into a chapel that hadn't been visited in years. And yet it was cold, emotionally cold. My feet moved instinctively, crossing the room toward a tall, wooden wardrobe in the far corner. Something about it drew me in. It groaned softly when I opened it. Inside were rows of perfectly hung dresses, mostly vintage, lots of lace. I reached in and brushed my fingers against the fabric. Then I noticed something odd. A small stack of shoeboxes on the wardrobe floor, sealed with masking tape. Each one was labeled by year. 1997, 1998, 1999, 2000. I grabbed the top one and sat on the edge of the bed. My fingers trembled slightly as I peeled the tape. Inside were photos, Polaroids, black and whites, even a few newspaper clippings. I pulled one out. It was a picture of a young woman, maybe in her 20s. Dark hair, soft smile. She looked like me, but not quite. Her eyes were wider, sadder. Behind her stood a tall man, blurry, with a hand resting on her shoulder. Something about him made my stomach twist. I flipped the photo over. Scrawled in faded ink, Eleanor and Joseph, summer 1959. I blinked. Joseph? That was my grandfather's name, but he died before I was born. At least, that's what I was told. I reached for the next photo. This one was wrong. It showed the same woman, Eleanor, sitting on a hospital bed, her face pale. A nurse stood nearby, holding something small and wrapped in cloth. A baby. I flipped it over. March 1960. She chose silence. I sat frozen for a moment, the photo shaking slightly in my hand. Then I opened the next box. Inside were letters. So many letters. All addressed to Eleanor Whitmore, from J. Alden. All unopened. My heart pounded. I opened the first one. Eleanor, you don't have to keep her from me. I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But she's mine too. Please don't shut me out again. I'm begging you. She's mine too. The words repeated in my head like a broken metronome. I opened a second letter. Eleanor, I went to the hospital. They said there's no birth record under your name. What are you hiding? Where did you go? Did you change your name again? I won't stop looking for her. Who was her? I grabbed the last box. At the bottom, under some more photographs, was a sealed envelope addressed in neat handwriting. To Clara, when you are ready. My breath caught. Hands trembling, I opened it. My darling Clara. If you're reading this, I'm no longer alive. And that was always part of the plan. I knew you would come here one day, despite your mother's wishes. And I knew you would want the truth. The truth is, I was not the person you thought I was. And neither is your mother. You weren't born in a hospital. You were born in this room. Patricia is not your mother. She is your sister. I stopped reading. My ears began to ring. I stood up, stumbled back from the bed, and dropped the letter. I couldn't breathe. Not my mother? My sister? That would make Grandma my actual mother. 1,000 moments from childhood hit me at once. Her distance, the way she watched me, how she never hugged me, never called me granddaughter, just Clara. I thought of Mum, Patricia, how she always looked tired, how her eyes darted whenever I brought up the room, how she avoided family photos. She had carried this secret for 28 years. I sat on the floor. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just stared at the letter, at the truth unraveling in jagged pieces. The door had been unlocked. But now, everything else felt like it was falling apart. I don't know how long I sat there, on the carpeted floor of Grandma's room, surrounded by photos, letters, and boxes that had just detonated my entire life. My legs were numb. My hands tingled. My heart beat so fast it felt like it might bruise my ribs. But my mind? It was oddly still. It's strange how discovering your whole life has been a lie doesn't cause you to scream or cry, at least not right away. First, it paralyzes you. It erases every truth you thought you knew and leaves a hollow space you don't know how to fill. I eventually picked the letter back up. My hands were steadier this time. You came from love, Clara. A complicated love. One full of mistakes, shame, and fear, but still love. I was 17 when I had you. Joseph, your father, was older, married, a respected man. I was his mistake, or maybe his regret. I never knew which. Patricia was 10 at the time. I was still trying to raise her when I found out I was pregnant again. My parents wanted me to give you away, to send you off quietly and pretend none of it happened. But I couldn't. I already failed once. I refused to lose another child. I read that paragraph over and over. Grandma, no, Mum was 17, pregnant, alone, with a 10-year-old daughter already, and a married man as the father of her second child. She had raised her daughter and her granddaughter under the same roof, all while pretending one was the mother and the other the grandmother. It was absurd, heartbreaking, and yet strangely understandable. In her world, silence wasn't cowardice. It was survival. I folded the letter gently and placed it back in the envelope. Then I stood up. The room, which had once felt distant and cold, now throbbed with emotion. I walked slowly around it, seeing everything with new eyes. The rocking chair where she used to sit, it was where she rocked me to sleep. The table with the worn book, it was her diary, which I now noticed had my name scribbled along the edges of the pages. And then I noticed something else. A small wooden box, tucked beneath the bed. It was smooth, old, and had a tiny carved heart on the top. Inside were more photos, this time only of me. Baby Clara in a crocheted yellow hat. Toddler Clara holding a stuffed bear. School-aged Clara at a piano recital. Dozens of them. None of these photos were ever in our family albums. None of them ever hung on the walls. But she kept them. Hidden. Protected. There were notes, too, written on the back of some pictures. She loves music. She's like me. I hope she never finds out the truth this way. I miss calling her mine. That was when I finally cried. Quietly, the way you do when you're too tired to sob, but your soul still needs to pour something out. I cried for her. For me. For the years we lost because society said silence was better than shame. By the time I emerged from the room, it was nearly dusk. The sun had begun to paint the hallway gold, and I could hear the faint creak of the kettle downstairs. Patricia was in the kitchen, pouring tea into 2 mugs. She didn't look surprised to see me. "I suppose you read the letter," she said calmly, sliding a mug toward me. I didn't speak right away. I just sat down, cupped the warm mug in my palms, and stared at the swirling steam. When I finally looked up at her, I asked the question that had been clawing at my chest since I read the last line. Why didn't you tell me? She took a breath, then another. Because I loved you too much to let you look at me with pity. Or worse, disgust. Her voice didn't tremble. It was too worn for that. But I could tell she had rehearsed that line for years. I raised you like my own because, in every way that matters, you were mine, she said. Mom. Eleanor, she never recovered from what she went through. And Joseph? He disappeared, vanished from both our lives. I don't even know if he's alive. But she wanted to protect you. We both did. She didn't protect me, I whispered. She erased me. Patricia looked down, her fingers tightening around her mug. You think I didn't want to scream it out loud, she said, her voice now shaking slightly. You think I didn't want to shout from the rooftops that you were my sister? That I had a sister I adored and resented and pitted all at once? I couldn't, Clara. We were girls. We were poor. And we were afraid. That's what women like us did. We chose silence. We sat in silence for a long time. Eventually, I asked the question I was afraid to know the answer to. Did she ever regret it? Patricia looked toward the window. She regretted everything except you. And somehow that was enough. The past couldn't be undone. The lies couldn't be rewound. But the truth, brutal and bleeding as it was, had finally been spoken. And that meant something. That meant everything. 2 weeks passed. Not peacefully. Not easily. But they passed. I stayed in the house I once only visited for holidays. I couldn't bring myself to leave just yet, not until I understood the full weight of what had been hidden. Patricia, my sister, I was now trying to say in my head, was giving me space. Quiet dinners. A few attempts at light conversation. Mostly silence. Not cold. Just cautious. It was during one of those quiet evenings that I found another clue. Grandma's, Eleanor's, closet had a locked drawer. I hadn't noticed it before because the top shelf was filled with scarves and neatly folded cardigans. But the small brass key from the letterbox, the one I'd tucked in my pocket, fit perfectly. Inside were documents, old bank statements, a passport, and a name that wasn't hers. Eleanor Grace Alcott, known to me all my life as Grandma, was once Eleanor Grace Whitmore. I stared at the name. The pieces shifted again. Why would she change her name? I pulled out more papers, one particularly old letter with handwriting different from hers. Eleanor, you told me once you didn't want to be forgotten. You wanted to disappear completely. But this is running, not healing. You can't just bury the truth and pretend it won't claw its way back up. You left a storm behind. I hope you find peace, but someday Clara will need answers. Not legends. Not lies. Jay. That had to be Joseph. My hand shook. He wasn't dead. Not then, at least. He'd written this letter, possibly after she ran. After she left him. I scrambled through more of the drawer. Behind the passport was a weathered photo. A man in a wool coat standing in front of what looked like a boarding school. He had kind eyes and thinning blonde hair. On the back, in Grandma's handwriting, Joseph, the last day I saw him. So he had existed. She hadn't fabricated the story. She had buried it. Carefully. Deliberately. It was starting to feel like my life had been edited. Every truth redacted and footnoted in invisible ink. The next morning, I sat with Patricia again. I laid the photo between us. Did you ever meet him? She looked at it quietly, exhaled through her nose. Once, she said. I was 12. He brought chocolates, sat awkwardly in her kitchen, and tried to ask about my school. Then he gave Mum a thick envelope, kissed her cheek, and left. I never saw him again. Why didn't he stay? He couldn't. He had a whole other life. A wife. Children, I think. Mum never told me their names. Did his wife know? I doubt it, Patricia said. Mum said she never wanted to be the woman who ruined a home. Just the woman who disappeared. The words clung to the air. She changed her name, I whispered. Yes, Patricia said. It was her way of cutting the cord, becoming someone else, someone clean. I pressed my fingertips to my temples. There was something gutting about a woman having to erase herself to survive, and something even more haunting about the idea that Joseph, my father, might still be out there, living quietly, never looking back. I started searching the name, Joseph Whitmore. It wasn't exactly rare, but it wasn't common either. The online rabbit hole led me through obituaries, property records, archived yearbooks. And then, on the third night, I found him. A photo in a local newspaper's online archive. Dr. Joseph Whitmore, retired literature professor, donates personal library to university archive. The photo was from 2 years ago. The smile was unmistakable, the same as the one in Grandma's photo. He was in Massachusetts, still alive, still out there. I stared at the article for a long time. I didn't know what I felt, anger maybe, or sadness, or something harder to name. He had gone on, lived a respectable life, built a legacy while leaving behind a daughter he never acknowledged. I emailed the university, claimed I was writing a personal history piece, and wanted to ask Dr. Whitmore a few questions. To my surprise, they replied the next day. He still did occasional guest lectures. They forwarded my message. For days later, I received an email. Ms. Olcott, I'm not sure what this is about, but your message stirred something I haven't let myself feel in years. If you're truly who I think you might be, please say so. Joseph Whitmore. I didn't reply immediately. I stared at the blinking cursor, thinking of Eleanor, of how she must have held her breath every day, waiting for a knock that never came. Thinking of Patricia, sitting across from me, trying to be mother, sister, protector, all at once. And now, me, carrying the weight of everyone's secrets and deciding whether to ignite the past. I typed 2 words. I am. He replied the next morning. Then we need to talk. I booked the flight, quietly. Patricia didn't ask questions. She simply packed me a small tin of shortbread and said, "Don't let him rewrite your worth." I nodded. My mouth was dry. I didn't trust it to say anything wise. Boston was gray and wind-shaken when I landed, the kind of cold that sliced through wool. I wore Eleanor's old scarf, the green one I used to tug as a child. It felt oddly like armor. I took a cab to the small, ivy-wrapped college campus where he lived near the faculty quarters. His email said he'd meet me at the university cafe. I spotted him before he spotted me. He sat with a paperback in hand, something about 19th century poetry, and sipped his tea with the stillness of someone who hadn't rushed in decades. I walked over. "Dr. Whitmore?" I asked. He looked up, and I watched recognition flood his features like a tide he wasn't prepared for. "Clara," he said softly. We stood awkwardly. He didn't hug me. I didn't offer one. We just sat. The silence was dense. Finally, I said, "You knew about me." He swallowed. "Yes. You never came." "I wasn't allowed." That stung. "You're a grown man." "I know," he said. "But back then, your grandmother, Eleanor, she begged me to stay away. Said it was cleaner that way." "You agreed." He looked away. "I had a wife. 2 boys. A tenure. Eleanor wanted peace, and I gave her what she asked for." "And me?" I asked, voice tighter than I meant. He winced. "I thought she'd tell you. Eventually." I pulled the photo from my coat pocket, the same one she kept in her drawer. I slid it across the table. "She did," I said, "but only after she died." He held the photo like it might burn him. His fingers trembled. "That was the last time," he whispered. "She wouldn't take any money. Said she didn't want pity. Just silence." "She got it," I said. He nodded slowly. "You must hate me." I didn't know if I did. I hated the idea of him. The father-shaped hole. The hollow birthday cards that never came. But sitting across from this tired man with crow's feet and guilt in his smile, I didn't hate him. I just didn't know what to do with him. "I don't need a dad," I said. "I'm 28. I've survived." I don't expect forgiveness. Good, I replied, because you don't deserve it. But I came for answers. He nodded again, slowly, like he'd rehearsed this scene in his head 1,000 ways. She was brilliant, he said. Your grandmother. Fierce. Guarded. I met her at a symposium in Oxford. She was presenting on post-war feminism. I was floored. I smiled faintly. She used to quote Sylvia Plath at me over soup. He chuckled. She said she'd never want children, never need anyone. And then she found out she was pregnant, and I panicked. Because of your wife. Because of everything, he said. But I offered to leave. She refused. Said she'd raise the baby alone. Said love wasn't always a reason to ruin lives. We sat in silence again. She renamed herself, I said. Changed her whole identity. I offered to help her, he said. She wouldn't let me. Said she'd rather disappear than become someone's mistake. My throat tightened. She told me she'd been hurt before. Abandoned. I didn't know the whole story. I still don't. But she believed the world was too cruel for her softness. We sat there for nearly an hour. I asked about the boys, my half-brothers. He said they were both in their 40s now. One lived in Chicago, the other in Vermont. Do they know about me? He hesitated. No. Will you tell them? He smiled gently. Only if you let me. I stood slowly. My tea had gone cold. I don't need them to know, I said. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I just needed to meet the ghost. He looked up, face drawn. And did the ghost disappoint you? I paused. Not for drama, but because I needed to mean what I'd say next. You disappointed the little girl in me, I said. But the woman sitting here, she doesn't need anything from you. I walked out into the cold Boston wind, heart both heavier and lighter. I didn't feel peace. Not fully. But I felt clarity. And that's something, isn't it? By the time I returned to England, the house had grown cold. Patricia had lit the fireplace and made stew. We sat together on the sofa, no need for words. She reached over and held my hand. You look like her more every day, she said. She was hard to understand, I replied. She was harder to carry. We both laughed quietly. I told her everything, about Joseph, the meeting, the cafe. She listened without interruption. I'm glad you found him, she said finally, even if he wasn't what you hoped. I nodded. He was exactly what I expected. We didn't need more than that. Weeks later, I returned to my flat in London, took Grandma's, Eleanor's journal and began typing. Page after page. Her pain, her silence, her vanishing. Not to publish, just to preserve. For no one else but me. Sometimes the truth isn't about what we do with it. It's simply about not letting it die. And maybe that's the real legacy.